Have you ever walked into a room full of people you love only to hear the words, "You weren't invited"? Go away. That's what my daughter said to me. And in that moment, I felt the floor give way under my feet. My name is Arthur Mallory. I'm 77 years old, a retired building inspector, and a widower for the last 8 years. I live in the same old Victorian house on Havenworth Street in New Bedford that my late wife Elaine and I bought back in 1979. The paint peels, if you look at it too long, the floorboards creak like a symphony, and the refrigerator hums louder than a tractor. But it's my home. It's the only place left that still feels like mine. Most mornings begin the same way. I wake at 5:30 without an alarm, joints, stiff body aching. But routine is a stubborn thing. I brew black coffee in the percolator Elaine once teased me for never replacing, make my oatmeal with raisins, and sit by the window staring out at the backyard. The old apple tree is still there. It stopped bearing fruit years ago, but I refused to cut it down. At least the tree still stands even when relationships do not. Sometimes, out of habit, I still greet Elaine. "Good morning, love," I say into the silence, pretending she's across the table. Her absence is the loudest thing in this house. My daughter Rebecca has built a different kind of life, new cars, a pristine suburban home, her husband Adrian's fast-growing financial firm. She has 2 children I love with all my heart, Sophia, 11, with eyes sharp like mine, and Matthew, 13, tall and restless. I used to see them often. Now months pass in silence. The truth is, Rebecca and I have been at odds for years. She calls me controlling, harsh, impossible. Maybe she isn't wrong. I spent 32 years inspecting buildings, finding cracks and faults invisible to everyone else. It became second nature to do the same with people with my family. Where others saw possibility, I saw weakness. And where others wanted comfort, I offered only correction. 9 months. That's how long it had been since we last sat together at a family dinner. Then one Sunday morning, a letter arrived in the mail by mistake. It was an invitation from Sophia's school announcing her role in a play, Peter Pan. My granddaughter would be Wendy. My name was not on the envelope. It had been addressed to Rebecca's family. But holding it in my hands, I felt something stir. A chance. I hadn't planned to call Rebecca, but later that day the phone rang. It was her voice, tired, hesitant. "Dad, we're having a family dinner next Saturday. 6 o'clock. You can come if you want, if I want." As though it were a burden for me to sit at my own daughter's table. Still, I said yes. That night, I pulled out an old box from the hall closet. Inside was a gold pocket watch passed from father to son for 4 generations. My father gave it to me when I turned 21. I never had a son to pass it to, but I decided then it would go to Matthew. The boy deserved to know where he came from. For Sophia, I planned something else. She once told me she loved the stars. I found a telescope, small but strong enough to open the sky for her. I wanted her to see that life was bigger than suburban fences and her father's fragile empire. I ironed my old Navy suit last worn at Elaine's funeral and hung it by the door. I told myself this dinner could be a new beginning, a truce, if not peace. Deep inside, I knew the ground between us was cracked beyond repair. But maybe for the sake of the children, I could patch it. Still, one question haunted me. If I spoke the truth I had uncovered about Adrian's company, would I protect my family or lose them forever? And I want to ask you listening now, what would you choose in my place? To stay silent for the sake of peace, or to speak the truth no matter the cost? Before we go further, Tell me, where are you watching or listening to this story? From leave your city, your state, or your country in the comments below. I'd love to know how far this story reaches. Saturday crept closer, like a storm you can smell in the air, long before the clouds appear. I told myself I was ready, but my body betrayed me with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't shake. Routine, I thought. Stick to routine. That morning, I wrapped the scarf Elaine had knitted for me around my neck. The yarn had thinned with time, but the stitches were still firm, just like her. Every time I wore it, I felt her hands on my shoulders again. My knees groaned as I stepped into the November air, the chill cutting sharper than I remembered. I had an appointment with Dr. Pearson, blood pressure, the usual check. His office smelled of antiseptic and old magazines. He wrapped the cuff around my arm, pumped the bulb, and frowned. Still elevated, Mr. Mallory. Are you taking your medication? Of course I lied. Pills made me feel weak, and weakness was something I refused to accept, even if my body insisted otherwise. And your family? He asked casually, scribbling in my chart. They're fine, I answered quickly, the way you answer when you don't want more questions. Walking out into the drizzle afterward, I considered heading home, but the thought of an empty house was heavier than the damp air. So I turned toward the seaside cafe, a modest spot by the waterfront, where the coffee was strong and the waitresses still called you Han. Inside, the bell above the door jingled, and there he was. Timothy Reeves, an old colleague from the inspectorate. His once full hair had thinned to wisps, his nose redder than I remembered. Whiskey had always been his closest companion. He looked up, smirked, and raised his cup. Well, if it isn't Iron Mallory himself. Haven't seen you since the city tried to patch that library with chewing gum. I frowned at the old nickname. Iron Mallory, the man who never bent even when the mayor leaned hard. The library closed for repairs, the mayor lost re-election, and I earned a reputation for stubborn honesty. A reputation that outlived friendships. We shook hands. His grip was looser than mine, but the glint in his eyes hadn't changed. So what brings the great inspector to a dump like this? He asked, settling back into his chair. I lowered my voice. I need information. About a firm called Adrian & Co. Financial Solutions. He coughed into his coffee. That's your son-in-law's outfit, isn't it? Gathering dirt on your own family now? Don't dramatize it, I snapped. I just want to know if his business is sound. Lately, he's been flashing money like a Rockefeller and Rebecca. Well, she doesn't see the cracks I do. Timothy leaned back, drumming his fingers on the table. You always did smell rot before the rest of us. My nephew's in City Hall, Finance Department. He mentioned some firms being whispered about, high returns retirees flocking in. Sounds like a Ponzi to me. Could be Adrian's, could be another. Hard to say. A Ponzi. The word clanged like a dropped wrench. I clenched my fist under the table. Do you have proof? Timothy barked a laugh. Proof? I'm not your detective. I'm just telling you what I hear. If you want names, talk to Ramon Sanchez at the IRS. He's made it his mission to hunt down anyone preying on seniors. And you, Arthur, be careful. Dig too deep and you'll find more than numbers. You'll find enemies. Enemies I could handle. What I couldn't handle was watching Rebecca and the children lose everything because no one asked the hard questions. I scribbled Ramon's name in my notebook, the same notebook I used for building cracks and faulty wiring. Old habits don't die. They just change their targets. When I left the cafe, the drizzle had thickened into cold rain. I walked past the harbor, past rusted boats rocking in the tide, past the courthouse, where I once testified against a contractor who cut corners. I remembered his face red with fury as the judge handed him 5 years. People had called me merciless then, too. But the library didn't collapse, and no one died under shoddy beams. Back home, I opened my closet and stared at the navy suit again. Elaine had loved the way it made me look taller, straighter. I laid it across the bed and began polishing the gold pocket watch. The minute hand was still 2 ticks slow each day, just like me, still running, not as sharp. I couldn't ignore the question echoing in my head. If I walked into Rebecca's house armed with the truth about Adrian, would I be protecting my family or detonating it from within? Have you ever smelled something was wrong with a too good to be true promise, whether in business, family, or friendship? The rain didn't let up the next morning. It tapped against the windows like impatient fingers, as if reminding me that time was running out. I sat in my kitchen, the gold pocket watch open on the table, listening to its tired tick. 2 minutes slow. A warning. I had made up my mind. By 10 o'clock, I was walking into the municipal building where I had spent half my life. The new facade gleamed with glass and steel, but the smell inside hadn't changed: old paper disinfectant and tired ambition. Young clerks hurried down hallways with tablets in hand, notepads long extinct. I felt like a relic, but one that still had work to do. Mr. Mallory, the receptionist's eyes widened with recognition. I remember my father talking about you. You shut down his company's project once. I gave a curt nod. It must not have been up to code. She smiled nervously and pointed me toward the elevators. Office 412, Ramon Sanchez, he's usually in. Ramon had been a junior investigator when I was still active. Even then, he had a reputation for being tougher than nails, the kind of man who saw laws as black and white no matter who it offended. My kind of man. When I stepped into his office, he was on the phone, his desk buried under towers of files. He waved me in without missing a beat, motioning to the chair across from him. I sat down, listening to his side of the conversation. No extensions, he said firmly into the receiver. Either it's filed by Friday or it's non-compliant. He hung up and finally looked at me. His face had aged, hair thinned and peppered with gray, but the fire in his eyes was the same. Arthur Mallory. Haven't seen you since Wilson's funeral. Too many funerals lately, I replied. He gave a thin smile. So what brings you here? You didn't come to reminisce. I leaned forward. I need information about a firm called Adrian & Copu Financial Solutions. He didn't flinch, but I noticed his hand stiffen on a folder. Funny you ask. That name has crossed my desk more than once lately. What's your interest, Arthur? Professional, personal? I paused. The truth that my son-in-law ran it felt like a door I wasn't ready to open. Let's just say I'm worried someone I care about might be caught up in it. He studied me, then leaned back in his chair. You always did have a nose for cracks in the foundation. And this company. The walls aren't steady. My throat tightened. Tell me. Ramon lowered his voice as though the walls themselves might be listening. We've been monitoring them for months. Nothing official yet, no indictments, no arrests, but the red flags are there. Too many promises of guaranteed high returns. Portfolios that magically never lose money even when the market tanks. And the oldest trick in the book, paying old investors with new investors' cash. The words hung heavy between us. Ponzi. He didn't have to say it outright. How long before it collapses? I asked quietly. Could be weeks. Could be a year. Depends on how much fresh money they keep pulling in. But it always collapses. Always. I stared down at the pocket notebook in my hand, the pages already filled with names and figures. And when it does, people lose everything, Ramon said flatly. Mostly retirees, people who can't afford to start over. You've seen it before. Houses gone, savings wiped out, dignity stripped away. I felt my jaw tighten. I had spent decades protecting strangers from weak beams and faulty wiring. Now I was staring at a different kind of structure ready to crumble. And this time it was my daughter and grandchildren standing underneath it. Do you have complaints already? I asked. Not yet. Everyone's still getting their payouts. That's what makes it so dangerous. No one wants to believe the good times end. And when they finally do, it's too late. I rose slowly from my chair. Thank you, Ramon. That's all I needed. He didn't let me leave so easily. Arthur. His voice softened, but the weight in it was unmistakable. If this is personal, and I think it is, be careful. Once you start down this road, you can't go back. Families break apart over less than this. I nodded once. Families can rebuild. But money-stolen lives ruined that doesn't come back. When I stepped out into the hallway, the rain had grown heavier. The building groaned with the weight of storm water rushing through its gutters. I stood for a moment, the old inspector in me hearing echoes. Every structure eventually shows its flaws. Every lie eventually cracks. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the wrapped gifts for my grandchildren and the pocket watch for Matthew. My hand hovered over the phone. Call Rebecca and warn her, or stay silent until I had more proof I didn't dial. Instead, I whispered into the empty room, as if Elaine could hear me still. Would you want me to keep peace or to tell the truth? The ticking of the pocket watch answered for her. Steady, relentless, unforgiving. I didn't sleep much after leaving Ramon's office. His words kept circling my mind like gulls over the harbor. It always collapses. Always. The next morning, I walked to the public library, one of the last places in town where a man like me could sit unnoticed. I'd never trusted computers, but the library's rows of humming machines gave me cover. No one paid attention to an old man squinting at a screen. I typed in Adrian & Kober Financial Solutions. The company website gleamed with polished photographs, Adrian in an expensive suit, shaking hands with smiling retirees. Promises of 15% annual returns with zero risk were plastered in bold letters. I shook my head. Zero risk. There's no such thing. Not in buildings, not in business, not in life. Scrolling further, I found glowing articles in the local paper puff pieces, praising Adrian's visionary approach. Not a single word questioned how he managed such steady profits when the market itself had been bleeding. Typical journalism. Shallow as a puddle. But tucked in the corner of an investor's forum, I found what I was looking for. One anonymous user had written, "Be careful." Tried withdrawing funds, took 3 months, and the threat of a lawsuit. They promise the world, but the numbers don't add up. An hour later, the post was gone, deleted. But not before I'd printed it out. My fingers trembled as the machine spat out the page, the ink still warm. Proof not enough for a courtroom, but enough for me. I added the page to a folder with my handwritten notes. Conversations with Timothy, warnings from Ramon, details from the website. Piece by piece, I was building a case the way I once built inspection reports. faults marked in red, recommendations underlined twice. By evening, I was back at my kitchen table wrapping gifts for the children. My hands, stiff with arthritis, fought the ribbon and tape, but I pressed on. For Matthew, the new wireless headphones. He was 13 now, straddling that uneasy line between boy and young man. Music might carry him through the storm his parents were sailing into. For Sophia, the telescope. She deserved to see a sky bigger than her father's bank accounts. Each gift I wrapped felt like both an offering and an apology. Finally, I turned to the pocket watch. I polished its face until my reflection stared back at me older and harder than I wanted to admit. My father had pressed this same watch into my palm the day I turned 21. "Take care of it, Arthur," he'd said. "And make sure you live in a way that your son will want to take care of it too." But I had no son. Just Rebecca. Just the grandchildren who barely knew me anymore. The watch ticked on, even if the family line it was meant for had bent and frayed. I laid out my navy suit on the bed. I hadn't worn it since Elaine's funeral. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar from the closet. I brushed it down, ran my hand along the lapel, and thought about her voice. "Stand tall, Arthur," she used to say. "Even when the world tries to bend you." Dinner was 3 nights away. My mind rehearsed every possible outcome. If I said nothing, I might preserve the fragile peace, at least for an evening. If I said what I knew, I might destroy what little family I had left. But silence, like rotten wood, only makes collapse more certain. I closed the folder of evidence, placed the gifts beside it, and turned off the light. The house creaked around me, an old companion whispering in the dark. And as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one question echoed louder than the rain on the roof. Would I protect my daughter by staying quiet, or protect her children by telling the truth? Saturday evening arrived with the kind of November cold that settles deep in your bones. I buttoned my navy suit jacket, slipped the gold pocket watch into my breast pocket, and stared at myself in the mirror. The man looking back was older lined, but his spine was still straight. Elaine would have wanted that. I placed the wrapped gifts carefully in a bag, the headphones for Matthew, the telescope for Sophia. Then I closed my folder of notes and left it on the desk. Tonight wasn't about evidence. Tonight was about family. At least that's what I told myself. The drive to Rebecca's house took 20 minutes. My old Buick rattled along slick suburban streets until I turned into a cul-de-sac lined with trimmed hedges and identical mailboxes. Her house was easy to spot, 2 stories, colonial-style lawn, manicured like a golf course driveway, paved in imported stone. Parked side by side were Adrian's gleaming black Lexus and Rebecca's silver Volvo. My Buick looked like an intruder. So did I. I checked the watch, 6 o'clock sharp. I had never been late to anything in my life, not an inspection, not a funeral. Being on time was the smallest form of respect a man could show. Before I reached the door, it swung open. Sophia stood there, brown hair, neatly braided eyes, sharp, my eyes reflected back at me from a younger face. "Grandpa," she said softly, surprise flickering across her expression. "You're here. I said I would be." I answered, stepping into the glow of the entryway. "And I always keep my word." She smiled faintly and shut the door behind me. The air inside smelled of roasted salmon and fresh herbs, expensive but impersonal. White walls, abstract art, leather furniture, the kind of decor Adrian favored, things that looked like wealth but felt like nothing. "Mom's in the kitchen," Sophia said. Dad and Matthew are watching the game." I handed her the bag. "Something for you and your brother. Just small things." Her eyes widened. "But Mom said, they're just souvenirs," I interrupted gently. "You can open them later." She nodded and carried the bag toward the kitchen, her braids swinging behind her. For a moment I stood alone in the hallway, the muffled voice of a basketball commentator spilling from the living room. I stepped inside. Adrian sat in a leather chair, glass of whiskey in hand, while Matthew sprawled on the rug, eyes glued to the screen. Adrian rose quickly when he noticed me, a smile stretched across his face but not reaching his eyes. "Arthur, glad you could make it." "Adrian," I replied with a curt nod, then looked at Matthew. "My boy, you've grown taller than I remember." He scrambled up awkwardly and gave me a quick hug. 13 years old, all limbs and uncertainty. He had Adrian's blonde hair and soft features, but Rebecca's brown eyes. Eyes that noticed more than he let on. "Good game?" I asked, nodding at the screen. "Great Celtics are ahead." Matthew Adrian cut in smoothly. "Why don't you help your mom set the table?" The boy obeyed without protest, slipping past us into the kitchen. That left me with Adrian, who poured himself another drink. Whiskey, he offered, gesturing toward the bar. "No thank you," I said. Alcohol loosens tongues, and mine was sharp enough already. Before more could be said, Rebecca appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, her face drawn with fatigue she tried to hide behind a smile. She kissed my cheek quickly. "Dad, I'm glad you came." Her perfume was the same one Elaine used to wear. For a moment it knocked the breath out of me. I forced a smile. I wouldn't miss it. We moved into the dining room. The table was laid with white linen, crystal glasses, silver candlesticks. Rebecca carried in platters of baked salmon and roasted vegetables. For a moment I almost believed we were a family again. We raised our glasses, wine for them, water for me, as Adrian made a toast. "To family," he said smoothly. "To family," I echoed, though in my chest the words felt heavy. For the next 20 minutes, conversation stayed safe. Rebecca asked about my health. I asked about her work. Matthew spoke proudly of a biology project on ecosystems, and I told him about the model bridges I built at his age. "You were always an inspector?" he asked, eyes wide. "Not at first. I wanted to be an engineer," I admitted, surprising myself. "But life had other plans. That's why I made sure your mother went to college." Rebecca's face softened. "And I'm grateful, Dad." It was a rare moment, warmth I hadn't felt from her in years. Sophia chimed in, animated, as she described rehearsals for her school play. She was playing Wendy in Peter Pan. Her hands fluttered as she spoke, her voice brimming with excitement. "Your grandmother loved theater," I told her. "She once played Ophelia in a local troupe. She was marvelous." Mom never told me that, Sophia said, eyes shining. "Some stories slip between generations," I said, glancing at Rebecca. For a brief flicker of time, it felt like the house was full again. Elaine's laughter, Rebecca's childhood chatter, the sound of family not yet broken. But under it all, the folder on my desk haunted me. The storm was coming. I could feel the floorboards straining beneath our feet. The first half hour of dinner had been surprisingly calm, too calm, like the hush before a storm. The salmon was cooked perfectly, the wine glasses sparkled, and for a fleeting moment I almost believed the evening might pass without conflict. Then I noticed it. When I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifted toward the sliding glass doors that opened onto the back porch. And there it was, the railing tilted ever so slightly, wood already darkening from moisture. A small fault invisible to most, but to me as glaring as a crack in a dam. I cleared my throat. "Rebecca, Adrian, did you notice the railing out back? It's loose. Could be dangerous, especially for the children." Adrian set his glass down a little too hard. "I'll call a handyman next week." "No need," I replied evenly. "I could fix it in an hour. I've got tools in the car." Adrian's smile tightened. "We prefer professionals." I leaned forward, hands clasped on the table. "I was a building inspector for 32 years. I think I'm qualified to fix one railing." Rebecca's sigh cut through the air. "Dad, please. Not now." The warmth that had begun to thaw between us froze instantly. Matthew shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Sophia glanced at me with wide eyes as though silently pleading for me not to ruin the fragile peace. Dessert came, Rebecca's apple pie, just as good as Elaine's had been. But my fork moved mechanically. I wasn't tasting pie. I was tasting resentment. And across the table I could see Adrian checking his phone, slipping out twice to take hushed calls. His shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched. I knew that look. Pressure. Guilt. When he returned after the second call, I couldn't hold back any longer. "So Adrian," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "How's the financial market treating you these days? Volatile, isn't it?" He froze for half a heartbeat, then forced a chuckle. "We're well diversified. Nothing to worry about." "Impressive," I continued, "especially when most firms are struggling to stay afloat. 15% returns, if I recall your advertising correctly. That's remarkable. Almost unbelievable." The fork slipped from Rebecca's hand and clattered against her plate. She looked at me, eyes flashing a warning. "Dad," I pressed on. "Of course, some would say promises like that are red flags. Regulators certainly think so." The room went silent. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Adrian's face drained of color. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying," I said, voice low but firm. "I'm stating. I know your firm is under scrutiny. I know the numbers don't add up. And I know it's only a matter of time before it collapses and takes my daughter and grandchildren down with it." Rebecca shot to her feet, hands trembling. "Dad, stop. This is our home, our dinner. You can't barge in here with accusations. I can't stay silent while my family's future hangs over a pit," I snapped back. Adrian slammed his palm on the table, rattling the silverware. "You've hated me since the day I married your daughter. This isn't about business. It's about your pride," maybe I admitted. "But pride doesn't explain regulators whispering Ponzi. Pride doesn't explain delayed payouts. Pride doesn't explain why you're sweating every time your phone rings." Rebecca's face twisted between anger and fear. "You weren't invited to dinner to interrogate us. You were invited to be part of the family. If you can't do that, then leave." Her words landed like a hammer. My chest tightened, but I stood anyway, pushing the chair back with deliberate slowness. I looked at her, my only daughter. Her eyes were burning wet with tears, but her jaw was set like stone. Adrian stood behind her, hand on her shoulder, as though he'd won some final battle. I wanted to tell her I was doing this for her, for Matthew, for Sophia. But all that came out was a hoarse whisper. "Remember this moment. Tonight you didn't just send your father away. You buried your future with him." I turned and walked out. No one stopped me. The gifts I had wrapped with stiff, aching hands sat forgotten in the kitchen. The telescope, the headphones, the pocket watch all abandoned, like my hope of reconciliation. Outside, the November night was sharp with cold. I tightened Elaine's scarf around my neck and glanced once at the warm glow inside their perfect house. Then I turned away. The night I walked out of Rebecca's house, I told myself I was finished. Finished trying, finished hoping, finished waiting for gratitude that would never come. But truth has a way of haunting a man. It doesn't let you rest until it's spoken. On Monday morning, I carried the folder of evidence to Ramon Sanchez's office. My shoes echoed against the marble floor of the municipal building, each step deliberate as if I were marching toward a verdict. Ramon took the folder, silently flipping through the pages, screenshots of deleted forum posts, glossy brochures promising guaranteed wealth, my handwritten notes comparing their claims to market averages. He read quickly, his brow furrowed. "You realize," he said finally, "if I act on this, there will be consequences. Not just for Adrian, but for your daughter. Her name is tied to his business." "I know," I answered. My voice was steady, but my heart thudded like a hammer. "But if this house of cards falls, it won't just be her. It'll be hundreds of families. People like me, people who can't start over." Ramon nodded slowly. "Then I'll open a file. But Arthur, this won't be quick. Weeks, maybe months. You must prepare yourself." I had spent 32 years preparing for collapse before it came. I knew the sound of cracks before anyone else could hear them. "I'm prepared," I said. When I left his office, the drizzle had turned to sleet. It clung to my coat, sharp as needles. For once, I welcomed the sting. It reminded me I was still alive, still capable of fighting for something. That evening, I returned home to a silent house. The gifts for my grandchildren sat untouched in the corner. I couldn't bring myself to unwrap them. The pocket watch ticked on 2 minutes slow, marking time like a metronome of regret. The phone rang. Rebecca's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring out. Then again, and again. I didn't pick up. Not yet. On the third day, I stopped at the corner store for bread and milk. As I stepped outside, sleet crunching underfoot, I heard a familiar voice. "Arthur." I turned to see Donna, the cafe owner, bundled in a thick coat. She frowned when she saw my face. "You look like a man carrying bricks on his shoulders." "Just groceries," I muttered. She shook her head. "No, it's heavier than that." "Did you make peace with your daughter?" I hesitated. The easy lie, "Yes, we're fine," hovered on my tongue. Instead, I said no. We had a dinner. It ended badly. Her eyes softened. "Pride can cost more than money, Arthur. Sometimes it costs the people you love." Her words cut deeper than the cold. I walked home with her voice echoing in my ears, the bread and milk forgotten weight in my hands. That night the phone rang again. "Rebecca." I picked it up this time but didn't speak. I listened to her voice, trembling, almost broken. "Dad, please. Adrian's business. There are rumors. The SEC came to the office. His accounts are being questioned. We could lose the house. The kids, they don't understand. They're scared. Please call me back." The line went dead. I set the phone down, slowly staring at the wall. My daughter, once so proud, was finally asking for help. I walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove. Elaine used to make Rebecca tea with honey and lemon whenever she was hurt. First a broken doll, then a broken heart. I took down the same old jar of honey, its edges sticky, its contents crystallized. The kettle whistled. Steam rose. And I wondered when she came to me this time, would I hand her comfort or truth? The doorbell rang exactly an hour later. I knew it would be her. When I opened the door, Rebecca stood there in the freezing night. Her coat half-buttoned, hair tangled, eyes ringed dark from sleeplessness. For a moment, she looked like a little girl again, the one who used to sneak into my bed after nightmares. But this was no dream. "Dad," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Please, can I come in?" I stepped aside. She entered hesitantly, as if the house she grew up in was now foreign territory. She sat down in the living room chair while I poured her tea with honey and lemon the way Elaine always had. She wrapped her hands around the cup but didn't drink. "It's all falling apart," she said finally. "The regulators froze Adrian's accounts. The lawyers are circling. We could lose everything. The mortgage, the cars, the kids' school. Dad, I don't know what to do." I studied her face. Pride and fear battled in her eyes. For years she'd defended Adrian with fire. Now the fire was smoke. "You want my help?" I said, my voice flat. She nodded quickly, tears spilling. "Yes, just until we get back on our feet. I know you've saved. Please, Dad, for the kids." I walked to my desk and pulled out a folder. Her eyes followed me like a trapped animal's. I laid the papers on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked. "Evidence," I said. Every lie Adrian told. Every warning sign. It's what I gave to Ramon Sanchez at the IRS. It's why the investigation began. Her hand trembled as she flipped through the pages. You did this. You turned him in." "I protected you," I corrected. "If his scheme had gone on any longer, you'd have lost everything without warning." Her face crumpled. "No, Dad. You destroyed us. You destroyed my family." I didn't flinch. I pulled out another document, a draft of my new will. "And I've made sure the children are protected. All my assets go directly to Sophia and Matthew. Not you. Not Adrian. A trust will manage everything until they're old enough to use it wisely." Her jaw dropped. "You're disinheriting me. Now when I'm begging you, I'm ensuring the future," I said firmly. "Yours is tangled in Adrian's lies. I won't risk their lives on your judgment." She rose, fists clenched, tears streaking her face. "You heartless old man. You've always been like this. Cold. Uncompromising. Do you even know what mercy is?" "Mercy," I echoed. "Mercy is letting my grandchildren eat when Adrian is in prison. Mercy is giving them a future you and your husband tried to gamble away." Her voice broke. "Mom would never. Don't you dare speak for Elaine." I snapped sharper than I intended. "She hated lies. She taught you better." For a long moment, silence swallowed us both. Then Rebecca whispered, "You told me once to remember the day I buried my father." "Maybe this is it. Goodbye, Dad." She turned and walked out. The slam of the door rattled the old windows. I stood motionless in the quiet house, the steam from her untouched tea curling into nothingness. On the mantel, Elaine's photograph smiled at me with that knowing look, the one she wore when I was making a mistake she couldn't stop me from making. I was right, I told her, picture my throat tight. I did what I had to do, but the silence that followed felt heavier than truth itself. If your child begged for help after choosing a path you knew would ruin them, would you give in or stand firm? Exactly 7 days after that dinner, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the gold pocket watch ticking faintly beside a cold cup of tea. The gifts for my grandchildren still rested in the corner untouched, wrapped in paper that now looked foolishly bright. The newspaper headline stared at me from across the table: Adrian and Co. Financial Solutions under federal investigation. The article detailed raids on the office files, seized accounts frozen. Clients were advised to call a hotline. It didn't mention arrests yet, but the words were there in black and white. Ponzi scheme, misuse of funds, senior citizens targeted. I felt no triumph, only the quiet inevitability of rot finally exposed. The phone rang. Rebecca's name glowed on the screen. For a long moment I watched it, unmoving. When it rang again, I picked up. Her voice cracked with desperation. "Dad, it's over. The SEC came, the IRS too. Adrian's company is finished. They froze everything, even our personal accounts. We can't pay the mortgage, the kids don't understand. Matthew asked me if we're poor now." I closed my eyes, her words cutting deeper than I wanted to admit. "Where's Adrian?" I asked. "With a lawyer," she said bitterly. "He claims he didn't know that his CFO did it all. But I saw the papers, the forged numbers, the fake reports. He knew. He always knew." Her voice broke again. "Dad, please, we need help. The children, please don't let them suffer for his mistakes, for mine." I sat in silence, the pocket watch ticking between us across the line. "Come tonight," I said finally. "We'll talk." An hour later, she stood at my door again, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. She looked smaller, somehow stripped of the shine that wealth had given her. "Dad," she whispered, "we're ruined." I poured her tea again. She clutched the cup with shaking hands, her knuckles white. "What will you do now?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "Adrian says he'll fight. I don't believe him anymore. I don't believe anything. I need to keep the kids safe. That's all that matters now." For the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of the girl Elaine and I had raised. Not the woman chasing suburban perfection, but the child who once dreamed of becoming a teacher, who loved books more than jewelry. "You'll start over," I told her. "Smaller house, honest work. You'll show them what resilience looks like." She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. "Will you help us?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I handed her an envelope, my new will, the letter to Matthew and Sophia sealed inside. She stared at it, confused. "This isn't money you can spend today," I said, "but it's their future. I can't give you more than that. Not after everything." Her lips trembled. She placed the envelope gently on the table like it might burn her fingers. "So that's it. You'll help them, but not me." "I'll always love you, Rebecca," I said quietly. "But loving you doesn't mean bailing you out of every mistake. This is the only way I know to protect what matters most." She pressed her hands to her face and sobbed. For the first time in years, I wanted to reach across the table to hold her. But I stayed still. My hands remained folded on the wood, as rigid as the man I'd always been. Outside, the wind howled against the house. Inside, the only sound was her quiet crying and the steady, merciless ticking of the pocket watch. Rebecca left just before midnight. She carried nothing with her but her empty hands and a silence that hung heavy between us. I watched her taillights vanish down Havenworth Street, swallowed by the fog. The house grew still again, the kind of stillness that seeps into your bones. I sat in my chair, staring at the envelope she'd left behind on the table, my will, my letter to the grandchildren. She hadn't even taken it with her. Perhaps she couldn't bear to look at it. Perhaps she already knew what it meant. For a long time I sat there, the tick of the pocket watch loud in the quiet room. Every second felt like a verdict. In the days that followed, the news grew worse for Adrian. His photograph appeared in the paper, his once proud smile replaced by a grainy mugshot. Alleged Ponzi architect, the caption read. His office was shuttered, his clients furious. Some lost their savings, some their homes. Rebecca called a few more times, once to tell me they had to move out of their house, once to say Matthew asked why Grandpa didn't visit anymore, once just to cry without words. Each time I listened. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. But one afternoon, I opened my door to find Sophia standing there, clutching the telescope I'd bought her. She looked up at me with those sharp brown eyes that mirrored my own. "Mom said you're angry," she whispered. "But I don't care. Thank you for this." She hugged me then quick and fierce before running back to the car where Rebecca waited. It was a small moment, but it was enough to remind me why I had done what I'd done. That night I took out the photo album. Elaine in her wedding dress. Rebecca as a child with missing teeth. The family we once were. The family fractured now. I pressed my hand against the page as if I could bridge the years through paper. I was right, I told the silence. But maybe being right was never the point. I thought of Elaine's smile, the one she wore when she knew I was being stubborn. I wondered if somewhere, somehow, she was shaking her head at me now. Still, the truth mattered. Principles mattered. Even if they cost me everything else. I closed the album and set it aside. Then I sat back in my chair, the fire crackling low, the pocket watch ticking beside me. The house was quiet, but for the first time the quiet felt honest. Maybe Rebecca would never forgive me. Maybe the grandchildren would. Maybe they wouldn't. But someday when they opened that letter, they'd know the truth. They'd know their grandfather loved them enough to choose justice over comfort, principle over silence. And that in the end was all I had left to give. Family betrayal cuts deeper than any wound from strangers. Sitting alone tonight, I realized that truth, dignity, and self-respect in old age often demand the highest price. I may have lost the illusion of family harmony, but I did not lose my integrity. And maybe that's what matters most in these Brian stories. True stories, father stories, and family betrayal stories. The courage to stand for what is right, even when it leaves you standing alone. So I'll ask you, if you were in my place, would you have kept silent to protect peace or spoken the truth to protect the future? If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Brian's Story, share this video with others, and leave a comment below. Your voices keep these grandpa stories, dignity stories, and family drama stories alive.